We do have some other really stellar people like Tom Hill who came here.
Red Dynamo! Red Dynamo!
We know I love to throw a party. So for those, if there's on the outside chance there's somebody here I don't know, I'm Rita Bacalar. I'm the Director of Economic and Community Development for the town of Trumbull. I'm going to be your MC today. We have a packed program, a very wonderful speaker lineup, and our terrific first selectman is going to address the crowd. We also have an addition to our agenda this year. We're going to do a little Trumbull trivia, okay? So no using your cell phone to get answers. I will be watching this. And we're going to be giving away some t-shirts during trivia. So that'll happen during our program today, Trumbull Trivia. And if you're smart, you'll look in your package, hint, hint, and there might be some answers in there. So I want to get us moving quickly because we have some extra agenda items, as I mentioned. So I want to welcome our first selectman up for her greetings and address this morning. I have to say, she's a dynamo, she's a wonderful person, she's a wonderful boss, and she's doing great things in the town of Trumbull. Vicki Tesoro.
Well, as you can imagine, Rita's always a hard act to follow, but I will try. So, welcome to everyone here this morning. I can't thank you enough for joining us. We grow every year with our breakfast, and I think we may have almost grown out of this room now. So, as I said before, I think we need to find a grander ballroom, right? So, again, as Rita said, and as you can see, we do have a full room record-breaking, so I thank you all for coming. So I have brief remarks, only a small book for you today. So eat your breakfast, enjoy, have a sip of coffee, and I promise not to bore you too much, but there's a lot of things going on in the town of Trumbull, and I want to talk about many of those here this morning. So first of all, again, thank you all for being here. I appreciate your investment and your confidence in Trumbull. I thank you for the jobs you create, for the goods and services you provide, and for all you give back to this fine community. Your confidence in our community is well placed. Trumbull is and will remain a community of choice for residents and businesses alike. Thank you to State Senator Marilyn Moore, State Representative Sarah Kitts. I don't believe I see State Representative David Figliano here yet. But yes, Better morning. Thank you. And I also want to recognize former First Selectman of Trumbull, Paul Timpanelli, Ray Paul, and Ray Baldwin. And I'm not sure I see our Chief of Police here, Mike Navarro. Is Mike here? No. And I'll just give a shout out to our Superintendent of Schools, Martin Semmel, as well. So thank you to all of our elected officials and board and commission members for also being here today. If there's any elected officials and board members, commission members, please stand up to be recognized as well. Any other elected officials? Your steadfast focus on making our great community even better is one of the reasons our community is so sought after as a great place to live, work, and play. I want to thank our town staff here this morning, those who could be here and those who couldn't, for serving our community so well. And again, any of my staff here, please also, I always like to recognize you. You are what makes this town tick. Please stand up and be recognized as well. So I also want to thank our police, EMS, volunteer fire departments for their selfless dedication to keeping our residents and businesses safe. Blessed with strong leadership and dedicated, passionate employees, Trumbull remains a safe community in which to live and do business. So I always want to recognize our first responders. Please give them a round of applause. And thank you to our keynote speaker, Dan Wontrowski, for joining us today. Did I pronounce your name okay? Yeah. That's 2 points for me. I look forward to your comments this morning. A special word of thanks to Rena Baclar. And our Economic and Community Development Commission for working so hard to make our town a welcoming one for our businesses and for your efforts in making this breakfast a success. I can't say enough about them both as people and professionals, and I can't think of a better team for Trumbull. So again, another round of applause, please, for Rena. As I stand before you today in 2023, I reflect on all that we have been through since 2020. The challenges, the hardships, and the losses might have overwhelmed us, but it did not. It did not because of the strength and resilience of our individual citizens, our businesses, and our town. Trumbull did not collapse then, and it is well prepared for any challenges that may come in the future. My vision for our community remains unchanged in its simplicity, captures the spirit of our New England town. A safe community welcoming to all, affordable to all, with excellent schools, ample recreation opportunities, and quality comprehensive services delivered in a fiscally conservative manner. In other words, the kind of place where all of you want to conduct business. Let me give you a few examples. We are fiscally strong. Our town general fund is the highest it has ever been. Our revenues remain strong and our taxes are stable. We are not afraid to make hard decisions and aren't afraid to make investments that benefit our residents and businesses alike. Independent bond rating agencies have consistently praised my administration for its sound, conservative fiscal management. We are in excellent fiscal shape, and I intend to keep it that way. Our schools are excellent. We've been rated the #4 school system in our state. Booth Hill Elementary School was recently recognized as a National Blue Ribbon School. Many of our schools are recognized as schools of distinction, and Trumbull High School is in the top 20 in Connecticut. Our academic and sports teams are outstanding. Our Constitution Studies team, as an example, finished in the top 10, not in the state, but in the nation. So thank you to some of our Board of Education members who are here this morning, so thank you to all of you for what you do for our community and our children. People are choosing Trumbull. Trumbull is one of the most sought-out destinations for people moving to our state. Housing sales and prices remain strong, and new forms of housing are attracting people to come to our community. These new residents will be a source of new customers for our local businesses. Our town has proven that as we evolve and change with the times, that we can do so without losing the essential character of our community. A walk down our beautiful tree-lined Main Street or in our newly renovated Twin Brooks Park shows that Trumbull's best days are ahead because our community is strong and is welcoming to all. I also want to thank Lynn Baum, who leads the Fairfield County Broker Network for joining us today. We appreciate your partnership with our town. We have a tremendous amount going on in Trumbull to report. We have new business locations, we have business expansions underway, we have made considerable progress around our commercial centers that focus on improved safety. Finally, we have a traffic light on Route 111 near the Fitness Edge Plaza. It only took 8 years, but who's counting? Soon we'll have a traffic light installed at Whitney and Main Street, and I promise that will not take 8 years. That should happen in the spring. We continue to work with the state of Connecticut to improve the intersection at White Plains Road and Daniels Farm Road. I'm sure all of you have frequented that area because we have a Starbucks there. one of the favorite stopping points in town. So we have increased walkability and safety in town with the installation of new sidewalks along our main streets, including White Plains Road, Whitney Avenue, and Main Street. Many of these projects are grant funded, reducing the tax burden on both our residents and businesses. Again, another shout out to Rena. We have a world-class market feasibility and land use study for our mall area that is already reaping new investment and business interest to that area. We have applied for a major federal funding to improve the Trumbull Center corridor. The Long Hill Green area is bustling. We have 3 major projects underway that will improve walkability, traffic flow, and the green. We have taken nearly 1 million square feet of underdeveloped or underperforming properties and restored them to the tax rolls. We did this, yes. We did this by focusing on smart, strategic, and responsible development that reflects the character of our community and follows our plan of conservation and development. That's why we keep this town looking as beautiful as it is.
Yes.
When I took office, Trumbull had the highest Class A and B office vacancy rate in Fairfield County, at over 40%. We now have the lowest at 11.9%. With all of you to attract businesses to our town and to redevelop obsolete property. Maybe you've been following our series of grand openings and ribbon cuttings. We actually have one today directly following this breakfast. We are welcoming Transpac. Transpac, if you're here, can you wave? We are opening at 120 Corporate Drive. We have a number of representatives from Transpac here, and we hope some of you will join us today at 11 a.m. for the ribbon cutting, grand opening, and tour. Transpac designs, engineers, and manufactures packaging for manufacturers including the aerospace, semiconductor, and data center industries. We are thrilled to have this wonderful new company in Trumbull, and we look forward to helping you connect with other industries in our community. We have some additional upcoming businesses openings over the next 2 weeks. I believe we have JoJo with us today. Do we have JoJo? So JoJo is opening Jimmy Vogue in the Trumbull Mall. This new franchise will offer gifts, fast fashion, beauty, household, and other unique products. There will be a ribbon cutting coming in early November. So I also want to give a quick shout out, and this may take a little bit of time, to all our 2023 business openings and expansions. So in the Route 111 area, we have Transpac, 123 Pronto, North Star. In the Trumbull Corporate Park, we have Fraser Lane Incorporated, 4 Core Financial, Aptar Group. In Trumbull Center, Paul's Haircutters. That's very exciting for everybody because that's owned by a Trumbull resident and somebody that my kids went to school with. That makes me feel a little older, but you know, it's okay. Hartford Healthcare Urgent Care is expanding across the streets. Lindeman Reservoir, Oakview, Cambridge area, Break Fire Protection on Reservoir Avenue. Aspire, servicing people with special needs at 7 Cambridge. CES New School at 40 Oakview, which is under construction. Integrated Dermatology Management at 7 Cambridge. Hawley Lane, TJ's Discount Liquors, which expanded an additional 2,000 square feet. Home goods space, we have a new retail tenant coming to that space. Trumbull Performing Dance Academy, Fire and Ice Store, Card Store. In Long Hill Green, we have Golf Tech, Bearskin, Soretta Builders, which relocated the business from Bridgeport to above the Echo, and Car Pilates. And ribbon cutting will be at noon on November 5th. which everyone is invited to as well. Again, in the mall, we have Portobello Menswear that opened 2 weeks ago, and T-Mobile expanded their storefronts, and that is actually their busiest. In our Trumbull Mall, which is very important for everyone to know, that is their busiest store in the Northeast. So I want all our businesses to know we are here to help you succeed. We want you to know that our slogan, "We work for you," I don't know if that's a trivia question, but maybe it is. It's more than just a catchy phrase. It is the basis on which we operate every day. To that end, we just had our Trumbull Restaurant Week last week. We had 22 participating restaurants, and what a success it truly was for our community. We appreciate all of you, and especially our sponsors, AFC Urgent Care, Sound Development, Aquarion, Newtown Savings Bank, Fort Core Financial, and the Trumbull Chamber. All of them made this great event last week possible. We are grateful that all our businesses are a part of our community. Your success is our success. And I have to say it because I say it every time I speak, Trumbull is the place to be. I'd also like to give a shout out to Dan Onofrio. Dan, he's president of the BRPC. So thank you all for coming today, and I look forward to many more great things ahead working with all of you. So I'm going to turn the program back over to Rena. Enjoy your breakfast and enjoy our keynote speaker this morning.
Well, thank you, Vicki, for that wrap up on everything Trumbull. We're here for you. I think most of you know, Vicki and I both have an open door policy, particularly for our businesses, not just to help you move in, but to help you grow while you're here. So never hesitate to reach out. I want to thank a few people in particular before I forget. My sort of direct team, Gia Ventillo, who's my assistant in the office. She's a powerhouse, up and coming leader in our community. Capacity so that we can do more and we can do it at a higher level. So thanks, G. I want to recognize, he's always hiding in the corner, Rob LeBrandy, our town planner. Fire Marshal Megan and her whole team, Bill Maurer and George Estrada from Public Works and Engineering, Dan Martin, somebody no one ever recognizes, I have to tell you, and for good reason. No, I'm just kidding. He's our assistant finance director, but when I work on grants, Dan and I have to work as a team, and it's very complicated. And he's always there. We work through issues. Thank you, Dan. And Bob Dunn, I think, is here also, and his team in the building department. Look, we have to follow rules. We want to ensure safety, but this is a business-friendly community and a business-friendly team, and I just want to personally thank all of you. I'd also like to recognize our commission and invite Beryl Kaufman. She was here a moment ago. Oh, there she is. She's the chairwoman of our Economic and Community Development Commission. She's just going to come on up and say a few words. Beryl. By the way, an extra round of applause for her 90th birthday.
Thank you and welcome to our annual BAB, Business Appreciation Breakfast. We often speak in shortened words because we don't have a lot of time. So our Economic and Community Development Commission becomes the ECDC, the Business Appreciation Breakfast becomes the BAB, and I just want to thank you all for coming. We appreciate the fact that you have located in Trumbull and stayed in Trumbull and support, and by partnering with us, you have all helped us be A, B, C, build a better community.
Awesome. She's a very wise person, and I appreciate your counsel always. I'd like to introduce a special friend and a collaborator this morning, Win Dong, who is the founder of the Fairfield County Commercial Broker Network. He's a dear friend, and one of the things that I do is work very closely with the commercial broker community. All those brokers that are here today, you're very important to our community. You are partners, and I am here, and we're a team. And it's really benefited when Vicki talked about our occupying unoccupied space, our commercial broker community, and our relationship together has really helped achieve that for Trumbull. So we appreciate all of you. And Win, we really do appreciate you and your partnership. You're just a great person and a great collaborator.
Yeah. Thank you, Rena. This is what success looks like to Vicki, to Rena, to Beryl, who was our tenant for 20 years. Congratulations, Beryl. Very nice to see you again. And Rena, always a pleasure to work with you. Like I said, this is what success looks like. Turn around, look around. This is a packed house. Why? Because Trumbull works. Trumbull can certainly be a beacon for other communities in the area that need the support of people like Rena. If we could mold more communities to act as they do, Vicki and Rena, we would be much further along. And I would suggest that we send that message out to the communities that we also serve. We go from Greenwich to Stratford, north to Danbury. So the Fairfield County Commercial Brokers Network is a group of 1,600 commercial real estate specialists and service providers. We meet monthly. Our last Friday of the month coincided with this event, so we decided to combine, and that's how we came to be today. So thank you very much for inviting us to participate with you. It's very much appreciated, and we look forward to your continued success. Thank you.
Okay, so time for a little trivia. So, how were Trumbull Public Schools ranked in 2021? Did anyone remember that? Right there. This lady here. Stand up. Fourth. She's got it. Really quick, one more, Jay, before we move on to our speaker. What's the median income in Trumbull? Does anyone know? You didn't study. Kevin?
129,200.
All right. Enough for that table there. We know where our overachievers are sitting. Okay. So, I want to welcome someone I'm so excited to meet. I've been watching him on YouTube. He's a very intelligent, knowledgeable individual. Dan Wontrowski is the technical strategist and associate director of research at Janney Montgomery Scott. Has over 20 years of industry experience as a technical analyst and strategist. Mr. Wontrowski regularly comments in the media on key issues arising in the industry with appearances in outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, Philadelphia Inquirer, CNBC, Fox Business, Bloomberg, etc. He's a frequent speaker at financial industry conferences. He is a chartered market technician and attended Villanova University, graduating cum laude with a BS in finance. He resides in Morristown, New Jersey, where he volunteers as a firefighter. Awesome. With the Relief Engine Company 312. We love our volunteer firemen and women. You know, I was told today that Janney Montgomery Scott, right? is the oldest investment firm in the country, pre-Civil War. That's amazing. So welcome, thank you for being here, and tell us, where have we been, where are we going, what's happening out there in the market, the economy? We'd like to know. Inquiring minds would like to know.
Thank you, Rena, and thank you, Carolyn, for shopping the Colony Advisors at Janney Montgomery Scott for connecting us. I'm really excited to speak with you all today. There's obviously a lot going on in the world. There is a ton of to unpack. We don't have a lot of time to do it, so we'll try to compress this as best we can. But I wanted to take a cue from your presentation and throw out a trivia question sort of to begin. There's no t-shirt involved, unfortunately, but maybe you can follow up with Caroline and get a Janney t-shirt. So the question is, because interest rates are really what's on everybody's mind today with the economy, when was the peak in interest rates in this country in recent history, and where was the 10-year Treasury trading at that time? By the way, the 10-year Treasury bond yield today is right under 5%, but when was the peak in this country? Here's your trivia question. Anybody awake this morning? You got one right there? You got it. He nailed it. Thank you. Rick, thank you very much. So, 1981, 1982 was the peak in interest rates in the United States in modern history. And the 10-year Treasury yield, our bond markets, right, that's our gauge of our interest rate environment here. The 10-year Treasury note yield in 1981, 1982 was trading actually closer to about 15%. 15% in 1982. So anybody that had a mortgage back then, where were you skewed at? 18, 20%, right? Yet the economy, by all shapes and sizes, got it done back then. I think we're going to continue in the years ahead to get it together in this country for a great growth story. My comments this morning are going to be carved up into a few pieces. First, how we got here into this period of really an uncertain environment, not only with the financial markets, but with the global economy. And then we'll talk a little bit about the short-term path that we see. And unfortunately, that part of the message is not going to be too happy and too cheerful because we have had a bumpy path, not only in the financial markets, the bond markets, but the economy as well. But we did want to finish up, though, on where we think the long-term trajectory is for the U.S. story, as well as its financial markets. So I'm the technical strategist at Janney Montgomery Scott. I'm also the director of research. My primary focus is looking at the financial markets, the equity markets in particular, but we read everything with a heartbeat. So we're looking at the bond markets, the currency markets, and obviously implications for the economy. And I bring up that trivia question this morning and rates being at 15% back in 1982, because I want to put into context how we got here today with all this market volatility that we're seeing, specifically in stocks. And we know that 2022 was a rough year in the equity markets. We know it was a rough year in the bond markets as well. We know 23 this year started off as a recovery year for the markets, but more recently we've hit a lot more volatility. And again, not just in the equity markets, the bond markets. Well, the reason that we're here, in our opinion, based on our work, has to do with that peak in interest rates in 1982, believe it or not. You see, for the last 40 years in this country, investors have been conditioned to a certain environment, not only for multiple expansion and a way for the stock markets to rise and stage these bull markets, but also for a key way for the economy to expand. Since 1982, we have witnessed a disinflationary interest rate environment in this country. That's very important because interest rates determine the cost of capital, the cost of money. Interest rates tell you how cheap or how expensive money is. And that really determines how much economic velocity we see and economic growth we see at any given time. And in fact, more so than that disinflationary interest rate environment, for the last 40 years, as investors in this economy and our markets, we have been conditioned to a certain response from our Federal Reserve, our central bank. And that is, over the last 40 years, since roughly 1982, Anytime the economy got in trouble or the stock market stumbled, we had a correction or a crash or a bear market, the Federal Reserve always did two things. They had a pretty set game plan, and that was either to lower interest rates, right? Or when needed, to even print up money and inject new liquidity into the system to stabilize both the financial markets and the broader economy. For 40 years, that was the playbook, and it worked. Anytime the economy stumbled, moved into recession, anytime the markets faltered, we saw crashes or bear markets, the Fed would do the same thing, and that's lower interest rates, and in times of real crisis, would even print up more money and inject it into the system. The reason I'm bringing that up to you today is because over the last 2 years, that secular environment, that backdrop for our economy and our financial markets has shifted, and it's shifting on a generational level. This is a paradigm shift in the financial markets. The equity markets are not the main stage here, they're the sideshow to what's changing in our interest rate environment. For the last 8 to 10 years in this country alone, our central bank has engineered an artificially low interest rate environment. You may have heard of the term ZIRP. You may have heard of terms like QE, quantitative easing. These are all synthetic ways that our Federal Reserve, through monetary policy, controls inflation, growth, unemployment, even markets and the market multiples. And that really has all shifted. So how did it shift? Why did it shift? Well, two culprits. First was COVID. It seems like a fever dream. It seems almost so long ago, but in 2020, there was a major black swan event that locked down the global economy. So that was really culprit number one. But culprit number two maybe is just as important. And that was the central bank's response to the COVID lockdown, right? And not just our central bank, not just our Federal Reserve, but central banks around the world. Remember, I told you for the last 40 years, their playbook has always been when you get in trouble, you lower interest rates, you inject money into the system, and it works. Things stabilize. Well, as a result of the pandemic, central banks around the world injected massive amounts of new liquidity into the system. In fact, over the span of roughly 14 months, our central bank nearly doubled our money supply. That's been unprecedented. That has never happened in the history of the central bank since its founding in 1913. That massive amount of liquidity that they created to stabilize not only the economy, but our markets, that stayed idle through most of 2020, even into 2021, as the global economy remained in lockdown mode. Then something interesting happened. As the world started to open up again, what we found was a massive demand explosion. Consumer pent-up demand, right, as a result of that COVID lockdown, collided with this massive amount of liquidity that these central banks around the world created. That collision created all the inflation that we're talking about today. The Fed's #1 gauge is CPI. This is easy to track, the Consumer Price Index. You'll always see the Fed's mandates. The Fed has two mandates: full employment or low unemployment, right? A working economy, a growing economy, and low inflation. 2% inflation. You'll always hear the Fed's target is 2% inflation. What are they talking about? That's CPI. Well, that CPI, as a result of all that liquidity they created from the pandemic, colliding with that demand shock from pent-up consumer demand around the world, pushed that CPI to around 10, 11% just about a year ago. That was the shock. That was the shot across the bow that disrupted the last 40 years of what we have been conditioned to expect from our central planners, that lowering interest rates, that injecting liquidity. Now, all of a sudden, they cannot do that anymore, right? Because now they have to battle inflation. So in 2021, 2022, the Fed makes a major sea change in its secular policy and starts raising interest rates significantly, radically. That creates a shock not only in the economy, but the stock markets. And as a result, in 2022, we had ourselves a little minor bear market, a pretty big correction, which our equity markets corrected for most of last year. They bottomed in October of last year, about a year ago, right around today. We're around the 1-year anniversary of the stock market bottom. And since then, they've been recovering. really this year has been an uneven recovery in the markets, and I would dare say an uneven recovery in the economy. Remember, the stock markets are a leading indicator of the economy, future economic growth or contraction. So what they're telling us today tends to materialize in the future. Well, this year the stock markets were a little bit bifurcated. They were split, really. In the first half of the year, we saw good gains in recovery. In the S&P at one point, S&P 500 was up 16, 17%. You also may remember the first half of this year, there was an AI phenomenon. And you know, at one point, the NASDAQ Composite Index, the NASDAQ 100, which is really a tech bellwether in the stock markets, was up close to 45%. 45%. Which really, that's an outsized gain. The average annual returns in the stock market are roughly 8 to 10%. So that was several sort of standard deviations from what folks expect. The problem with the recovery this year was that it was all lopsided. We saw money flowing into just a few areas of the market. While the S&P made modest gains and the NASDAQ was up close to 45 or over 45%, the rest of the broader markets actually were trading flat and even down. So that was telling us that something was uneven in this recovery effort. Typically, when you want to look for signs of a healthy bull market in stocks and equities, you want to see the engine firing on all cylinders. We call it market breadth. But it really is supposed to be the majority of sectors and stocks participating. When you only see a few sectors and stocks participating or sort of leading the charge, that tells you that there may be something underneath the surface that we need to keep track of. And indeed there was, because by August, we see that we're now sort of in correction mode in the markets again. It's always a lot easier coming to these talks when the market is up and we're in a big bull market and everything is happy and shiny. And unfortunately, we're not there today. But what we're seeing today is an important part of the market cycle. Now, as we move into the second half of the year, we do expect market volatility to persist. And what you guys have been seeing most recently is something called the Magnificent Seven. Has anybody heard that term in terms of the stock market? It's my guy right there. He definitely gets a t-shirt. So we talked about market breadth really briefly and how only a few sectors and stocks were kind of working this year in this recovery effort. The broader markets really weren't working all that well. Well, that Magnificent Seven was basically a handful, 7 stocks to be exact, of mega cap tech and consumer discretionary names. Those 7 stocks were responsible for pretty much holding up the entire market this year. Those 7 stocks are names you know: Apple, Google, Microsoft, Tesla, Amazon, so on and so forth. But what it told us was folks were hiding out in those specific areas and instead really not buying the markets as a whole. That gives us a pause to suggest and imply and really glean from future trends here that we continue to be in a transition period, not only in the economy, but the stock markets. What the stock markets are transitioning to this brave new world in the cost of capital, in the interest rate environment. The interest rate environment, which for the last 40 years has been disinflationary, and took that 10-year treasury yield from 15% in 1982 to 0 over the last few years, is normalizing. In the years ahead, the cost of money, the cost of capital is no longer going to be free. It's no longer going to be cheap and easy credit in this country. It's no longer going to be cheap and easy financing. And as a result of this, the equity markets, the uncertainty that's placed around them, are questioning, how do you achieve economic expansion? You know, how do you achieve multiple expansion in stocks when the cost of capital is no longer 0, when interest rates are rising? And so to answer that question, we look to history. And we ask ourselves that there have been periods in U.S. history where we have achieved such expansion, economic growth, as well as multiple expansion in stocks. And the history comes back with a resounding yes. We absolutely have, and we've actually seen this period before. The difference is the generations sitting in this room have not lived through it, but the markets certainly have. In fact, a great Renaissance period in this country was the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s, just after the Great Depression. This was a massive economic expansion for the country. It was a massive bull market in our equity market, so great time for long-term investing. And it was also a period of rising interest rates. In fact, interest rates rose from the 1940s at around 1% all the way up until 1982, our peak, we're peaking about 15% on the 10-year in 1982. We are making that same transition today. The U.S. is transitioning from its disinflationary past of consistently lower cost of credit, lowering interest rates, and injecting liquidity into the system to artificially and synthetically grow earnings and create economic growth into a more normalized environment for investment and for economic growth. Cost of capital is no longer going to be free. That's what equity investors now are getting used to. That, over the short run, is going to lead to more bumpy roads in the markets, more volatility. We've seen the markets effectively move sideways, with the S&P hitting a low last year of around 3,500. Today it's around 4,100. The Dow, as you're probably watching, around 33,000. It hit lows last year of 31, 32,000. We're kind of basing and putting in a floor in these markets as investors around the world digest this new interest rate environment. And that's actually a very positive thing, because what we're setting up is a platform, a floor really, from which we're going to launch the next secular expansion in this country. And we believe, and our work does suggest and does imply, that the U.S. over the next 1 to 2 years is going to turn the corner from this sort of inflationary or reflationary normalization, this transition period we're in, into another growth cycle. We are at the foot of another reflationary growth cycle in the U.S. And in fact, we think that the S&P 500, which is trading around 4,100 today, over the next few years is going to reach north of 6,000. Absolutely do. So how do we get there? How do you get from a secular transition period, a general transition period effectively in our debt markets, in our interest rate environment, to a new reflationary growth period where we expect the stock markets to undergo multiple expansion for the next several years? And remember, stock markets act as a leading indicator, a discounting mechanism. So as the stock markets resume an upward trajectory, resume back into multiple expansion and a bull market, that's going to be the leading indicator of future economic growth. Stock market cycles very closely correlated to economic cycles. So how are we getting from A to B? This period of uncertainty that we're in right now, where we have this bumpy glide path in both equities and the bond markets, the world is transitioning to this sort of brave new world in the cost of money. How do we adapt to this? How do we grow? Well, again, here we look towards history for some of the clues. And what we found in our research was that for every major secular expansion cycle in the U.S., there are always 3 drivers behind it. This is not to say that history necessarily repeats itself. We know it does not. This is not to say that these are the only things involved with any economic cycle or any stocks bull market cycle, expansion cycle. But these things were always prevalent during these cycles, and we believe they're actually very much tailwinds underneath the surface today. So as we go through this transition process in the markets, where the equity markets are bottoming, they're trying to find a floor here against this new world in interest rates, we want longer-term investors to keep that in mind, because our advice to long-term investors, not day traders. We deal with a lot of hedge funds and short-term fast money folks that worry where the markets are going to be by the end of the week. That's not what we're talking about today. We're looking for those investors that have a longer-term focus. So the next decade or so is sort of more our time frame. And within that time frame, we do believe these tailwinds are very much apparent underneath the surface. And they've been a part of every secular expansion, really dating back to the early 1900s in this country. So what are we talking about? 3 drivers that we've identified, that I've identified in our work dating back to my Payne Weber days back in the 90s. But demographics is first and foremost people power. People power market cycles, and people power economies. More so than any central bank monetary policy, more so than fiscal stimulus, more so than monetary stimulus. We need people to power growth. In this country, there's a very distinctive population cycle, believe it or not, a demographic cycle. It's a boom-bust cycle. So what are we talking about? Baby booms, generational cohorts, all sort of clustered together in very big numbers, followed by baby busts, generations with very small numbers within their cohorts. This boom-bust cycle in the U.S. dates back, believe it or not, to the Industrial Revolution, the late 1800s. The baby boomers that came up through the 80s and the 90s, they were not the first baby boom in this country. They were the biggest at the time, but they were not the first. In fact, we had seen series of boom-bust cycles in this country dating back, again, to the early 1900s, late 1800s. Why I bring that up is because there is very direct correlation to those population cycles and the economic cycles and the market cycles. So as investors, we want to key in on this as longer-term investors. Baby boom generations, cohorts, generational cohorts with big numbers in that cohort tend to drive big economic secular expansion periods. When a boom cohort moves from adolescence and enters the workforce as a first-time producer, consumer, and investor saver, that generates new economic velocity. That generates a lot of economic velocity. And as a result, the economy expands. And the market, as a leading indicator, rises. Demographics are a huge part of stocks, bull markets. And we can actually show you the data, and I'm happy to show you. We have a distribution list that I'll plug at the end. But we can show you all the economic cycles and the market cycles and how they're tied to this demographic data. In fact, U.S. Census data is public information. You could all check what we're talking about today. So why are we excited about the future sort of with this cycle? Because there is a well-known global aging population thesis. And we agree with that wholeheartedly. On a long-term basis, this world does face a global aging population. But there is a caveat to that, and that's that really doesn't hit any kind of global crisis mode for probably another 40 years. On a regional basis around the world, we will start to see some population crisis materialize. In fact, China is very close to a population crisis. Europe is actually top-heavy with more elderly people than young people. Japan's population crisis, when did that begin? 20 years ago. Japan has been in a population crisis for decades. The U.S., in contrast, not forever, but for the next decade plus, actually has a very healthy demographic profile. And we think it's going to lend itself to economic expansion and multiple expansion. Remember, I'm a portfolio manager. I care about the stock markets, right? So we care about the economy, but my number one job is returns. What drives those returns? Demographics drives those big secular expansion periods, those big bull markets throughout history. We believe they're going to drive the next one. Why? There's a number of cohorts. I'll just go over some of these numbers. There's no quiz on this. The silent generation is our oldest cohort currently in the United States alive. They're about 15 million, so very small. Behind them are the baby boomers. The baby boomers number about 82 to 83 million in this country. They have started to move towards retirement, but they are still very active consumers and investor savers. In fact, more so than the boomers moving towards retirement, they've remained very sticky in our workforce. They continue to generate a lot of economic velocity. Boom-bust cycle. Behind the boomers is Gen X. You may remember that term. That's me. So relative to the baby boomers at around 83 million, Gen X numbers about 46 million were baby bust. I always joke with my daughters, I had a much easier time getting into college because I had no competition. It wasn't from the smarts. So they had a lot more competition. So Gen Xers at around 46 million baby bust. We don't drive any secular expansion. We don't have the numbers. The boomers, when they came back from Vietnam, when they got out of college in the late 70s, early 1980s, in massive numbers, that cohort of about 83 million descended upon the U.S. economy and expanded it and blew it out into one of our biggest secular expansion stories in modern history. 1982 to 2000 was one of the biggest stocks bull markets this country had ever seen. That was part and parcel from that baby boom cohort, entering the system and growing, expanding the economy by their numbers. So why do we care about the future here? If the baby boomers are moving towards retirement, Gen X is a baby bust, right? Well, because behind us, our young population, I think, is very dynamic, and it has the numbers to promote economic growth, and we think it's gonna. So behind Gen X, remember, it's a boom-bust cycle. Behind Gen X, what's the cohort called? What's the name? Millennials, yeah, that one you gotta know. Millennials are this country's biggest generational cohort in nominal terms. They number anywhere from 93 to 94 million. They are bigger than the baby boomers. Now, I was a strategist years ago. We watched the millennials in adolescence. We watched them moving up the ranks in college, blowing out the college system, pushing up college tuition, making it almost impossible to get in because it was simply the law of large numbers. And a lot of strategists were poo-pooing that generation, saying, well, they're going to live in mom and dad's apartment, they don't want to buy cars, they don't want to be consumers. Guess what? They've done all of it. They're pretty much our #1 generator of economic velocity today. Their labor participation rates are roughly 83 to 84%. They are buying cars. They are moving into household and family formation. They are consumers. They are producers and investor savers. And they've contributed a lot to the economic growth of the last several years as they've moved into the system. But behind the millennials, there's another group which gets us excited as equity investors for the future. And that is Gen Z. And you've probably heard of this. So right in a row it goes Gen X, Y, and Z. I don't know what they're going to call the next one after Gen Z. But at this point, I don't know that I care. Gen Z, even though it's a baby bust. Even though Gen Z is a baby bust relative to the millennials, remember it's a boom-bust cycle, their numbers are pretty impressive. Gen Z is roughly 83 to 84 million. They're slightly larger than the baby boomers. And they are still predominantly in their post-secondary education years. They haven't entered our system yet. In the next 5 to 6 years, you are going to see entrance of another 83, 84 million entrants into our economy as first-time producers, consumers, and investor savers. And these are going to generate a tremendous amount of economic velocity. In fact, in the coming years, what you're going to see in this country is our workforce get skewed towards the younger side, which is very bullish for future economic growth and very bullish for the stock markets down the road. So as we go through all the uncertainty today, the #1 being central bank policy, what the Fed is going to do next, are they going to raise, are they going to pause, are they going to pivot? As we go through all the uncertainty on the geopolitical front, right, and all the fiscal stimulus and all that our public sectors are doing, as we move through all this uncertainty and the markets remain volatile, remember that underneath the surface, what's brewing is a very positive American story based on people power and based on the emergence of what's really a favorable demographic profile that lends itself to future growth and multiple expansion. So people power are very important. Second, 2 things, I'll be very brief, and then we can...
I want you to keep going.
There we go. All right, because I want to keep everybody tight. So remember, we talked there were 3 things in terms of what drives these cycles. First, by far, if you haven't realized already, is people power. That is the one that's really going to drive real organic economic growth. But the second are just important, and that's valuations. All we're talking about is how expensive or how cheap or how attractively valued is the private sector itself. Right? In any economy, you have 2 forces, the public sector, the federal governments, or local governments, and you have the private sector. That's households, that's corporations, that's businesses. How cheap or expensive is that private sector? How attractive is that relative to other choices? And this we watch because this drives very much these market cycles. We use the stock markets as a gauge of the private sector. So when valuation in the stock market is very high or very expensive, I'm saying the private sector is expensive, it's not a great value. When valuations are very low in the markets, we say, well, the private sector is very cheap, you're getting good value for future earnings and future growth. Right? And the way we judge that is the PE ratio. We're not going to go down on how to calculate that, but it's the price earnings multiple. So, right, the S&P today is trading at 4,100. In 2021, it was close to 5,000. That doesn't tell you how expensive or cheap the stock markets are. That doesn't tell you how expensive or cheap the private sector is. That's just the nominal price level that we're all watching on the charts. But you look at valuation, you look at those PE ratios. And you'll see through different periods of history, the markets get very expensive, the markets get really cheap. Well, today and after the last few years, I would say that our work points to the private sector being a very attractive value. It's not dirt cheap like we've seen in the past, but relative to where it is in history, where it's been in history, relative to other choices such as the debt markets, commodity markets, or overseas economies and markets, our private sector here is now very, very attractively valued. In fact, I think as we move through this bumpy period in the markets, where our stock prices kind of move in these trading ranges, we're going to continue to see this economy grow. You're going to continue to see earnings growth bump higher, and that's going to push our multiples and our valuations even lower. So by next year, I think that our markets, our private sector, is going to be very attractively valued, if not cheap. That is key because bull markets and expansion periods start from that point of attractiveness, of relative valuation being low and being attractive like that. And I think that's where we stand, and I think that's where we're headed. So valuations of our private sector, it's a very attractive investment at this point, even though over the short run, there are no animal spirits out there. Everybody is sort of afraid or worried. There's a lot of uncertainty, and that's keeping investment dollars on the sidelines. Nonetheless, that low valuation of the private sector offers good value. We think that's going to be one of the drivers. The third thing, and then we can wrap it up, is central bank policy itself. So I always like to say liquidity is what makes the economy and what makes the markets move. Think of it like fuel in the tank. When we talked about how the central bank, as a result of COVID, doubled our money supply in almost a year, which is unprecedented. So they created massive amounts of fuel in the tank that is really still sitting idle on the sidelines. In fact, in money market mutual funds today, you have just under $6 trillion sitting idle. In our banking system that still remains well secured and well funded, we have just under $2 trillion in excess reserve just sitting there. So we have bandwidth to withstand potential recession ahead. We have bandwidth in terms of liquidity to withstand volatility over the short run. It won't last forever, obviously, but we have that cushion, and I think that's what's allowing the economy to grow. If you saw GDP this week, it came out at 4.9%. This economy is still growing despite higher interest rates. That's reflationary expansion. We're getting it done. It's getting done. Well, that liquidity is going to be very important in the years ahead, and all I'll finish on is this. The central bank, which appears to have moved into this tightening mode, we're going to clamp down on inflation, right? We're going to raise interest rates, we're going to drain some of that liquidity from the system. Always remember this, the central bank will always remain accommodative and supportive of economic growth and multiple expansion. So whenever the economy gets in trouble, whenever the markets get in trouble, we see this destabilization either in the markets or the economy, it's not so much will the Fed lower interest rates, but they always stand ready to add liquidity into the system. In fact, just this year they did it. Remember the regional banking crisis that we saw back in March? Our central banks injected and printed up new money, hit it into the system to stabilize things. What I want you to think and bring to your mind is this: you have this tremendous amount of liquidity that's sitting idle on the sidelines. We have potential economic growth ahead due to demographics, due to a very attractively valued private sector and valuation. And at the same time, our stock markets, our equity markets, have shrunk effectively by 30-40% over the last 10 to 20 years. The number of publicly traded stocks out there for you and I to buy have shrunk, either through M&A, going private, going out of business. In addition, the float of the markets, the number of shares that you and I can buy, has decreased. Remember, there was the phenomenon for the last 10 years of corporate buybacks. That's corporations flush with cash pulling shares off the market. The reason I'm telling you this is there's a major contradiction, a major imbalance out there as we head towards this next economic growth cycle. And that's the potential for too much money that's been created on the sidelines. That's potential fuel going forward. Too much money chasing too few stocks in the markets. So you have this huge imbalance that if animal spirits return and confidence is restored, and I know over the short run that looks like such a tough call to make because there are so many uncertainties on the macro environment. But rest assured, if history is any guide, it will. Once that does, you have a tremendous amount of liquidity that can move back into the capital markets, that can move back into investment and push the economy and push the market multiple higher. So demographics, people power, that matters. That's a tailwind for the U.S., not forever, but in the coming decade, it's going to be supportive. Attractiveness of our private sector and our stock markets themselves. There's no bubble in the stock markets today. In fact, they're cheap, they're getting cheaper. And then finally, that sort of liquidity that you need, that fuel in the tank. I always say, if America runs on Dunkin', the markets run on liquidity. It's true. The Fed stands ready, even though they want to fight inflation, that if they see any signs of economic contraction, any instability, further instability in the markets, they stand ready to add liquidity into the system. So you have that financial accommodation. So underneath the surface of all this uncertainty is a very positive story brewing. We've seen this in the past. It's just the generations here, we haven't dealt with it personally. So we read it in the history books. But it is very prominent, and I think it's one of the things we want to focus on. We tend to focus on with our investors. So again, our call at the end of the day is that the S&P today, which is trading in the low thousands, we think in the coming years, not over the short run, next year is likely to be a bumpy year, certainly with presidential elections looming around the corner. But in the years ahead, even within the next 1 to 2 years, we do think these markets bottom as a sign of the economy starting to turn higher. And the S&P is going to shoot for a target north of 6,000. So with that, I'll finish my prepared remarks and we can open it up for Q&A. But thank you very much for your time.
And I was a little concerned, when I don't meet people, I don't know. You are amazing. The fact that you didn't have a note, the fact that you made all of that history to the current and to the future so understandable is not only knowledge, it's a gift. Thank you. We only have time for a few questions. So this gentleman that got the quiz correct, we'll give you an opportunity. If you can just speak up and we'll repeat the question.
Yes, sir. I was just curious, Dan, when would you guess quantitative tightening is going to start to hurt?
Did everyone hear that?
No.
When would he guess that the quantitative tightening is going to start to hurt?
And so it brings in the bigger question of, recession. So where do we stand on recession? So I do believe that the U.S. is likely going to see a recession within the next 1 to 2 years. But I want to frame that with something very important. The last 2 recessions that we've experienced in this country were both black swan events, several standard deviations out of what normally occurs. Think of our last recession. It was the COVID pandemic. It was a global lockdown. Very rare. The recession before that was what? The great financial crisis of 2008, in which our banking system effectively froze. Both several standard deviations out of normalcy. Most recessions in this country, in fact, 70% of recessions in this country are relatively benign in scope. That doesn't mean there's not going to be pain. It tends to be polarized, regionalized, and even it's sector-specific almost. So that being said, we do believe there is risk of recession ahead in the U.S. We do believe Europe is probably inching closer to one than us right now. Now, the caveat to quantitative tightening, because quantitative easing is the Fed pushes a button and injects liquidity into the system. That makes the engine go. Quantitative tightening is the opposite. The Fed drains liquidity, right? Raising interest rates is different. Raising interest rates does not destroy money supply. It does not destroy liquidity. It slows money velocity down. It slows the speed down. You withhold on your decisions. I was going to buy a house. Interest rates went up. We have to put it off. We still have that money. We're going to put it off. So that's the difference there. Quantitative tightening and the Fed. The Fed are no dummies. I think Powell's going to go down as one of our best or better Fed presidents. They learn from their own history. Folks in here, remember 1982 was the peak in interest rates, 10-year Treasury 15%. Paul Volcker was the Fed president at the time. The experiment that the Fed did in the 70s was to raise interest rates aggressively, but also pull out massive amounts of liquidity. They destroyed money supply. As a result, we had the stagflationary 1970s, a horrible, really structural bear market time. The Fed is not going to do that this time. They're paring down their book very slowly in very small increments, and even this year, they reversed it and injected new money into the system because of the banking crisis. So the question is when does all this liquidity come home to roost? The bigger question is the resiliency of our consumer with all that excess cash means that we have bandwidth for the next probably 1 to 2 years. So I think there's time that we have that you're not going to see that. The consumer is going to remain resilient. In addition, something I didn't talk about before is you have monetary stimulus, which is your Federal Reserve, right? Federal Reserve owns our money supply, by the way. The Treasury does not. You and I do not. They print up our money. They lend it to us. How nice of them. They are a for-profit, quasi-government agency, right? But aside from monetary stimulus and what the Fed does, what's the other form of stimulus? Fiscal stimulus that comes from our federal government. Fiscal stimulus is running very high right now. Why? Because of geopolitical uncertainty, because of war. War, economists will tell you, is probably the #1 inflationary factor for an economy. So you're asking, when does the liquidity run out? When does quantitative tightening sort of really get this huge hold on us? And the answer is, it may not. Because #1, the Fed does not have a stranglehold on liquidity. They remain very accommodative despite raising interest rates to slow the money velocity down. But also at the same time, our federal government, our public sector, is injecting fiscal stimulus into the economy. So more liquidity is actually coming. That's why the markets and the economy haven't fallen apart. Because despite the hike in interest rates, which is historic, there remains ample liquidity in the system, and it's going to continue to be that way. I know that Powell does not want to have a repeat of the Volcker era, so he's not going to destroy money supply. He just wants to slow things down. And again, at the same time, fiscal stimulus from our federal government is going to keep things reflated. So we may not see it. There is a good argument that we have a soft landing or no landing, right, in the economy. We've seen that thus far. And a big portion of that is Fed policy, what they've been doing behind the scenes, as well as fiscal policy. So it's a wait and see, but we have time and we have bandwidth based on all the liquidity that's been created. Yeah.
I think we're going to take one more question. This table has 2, but this lady here.
Sure. So AI is expected to raise GDP by 36% in the next decade or so. How does that factor into your model?
She asked a question about AI and how that factors into.
Yeah, certainly. So technology is always the disruptor that grows economies on a long-term basis. So what we're talking about AI today, they were talking about railroads back in the 1800s. They were talking about indoor plumbing, healthcare, and electricity. Those are all technology disruptors. So absolutely, AI is going to increase productivity. I think that the U.S., against favorable demographics, right, against a private sector that is reasonably valued, I think attractively valued, and against ongoing accommodation from our Federal Reserve in terms of providing liquidity fuel for growth, we are going to see a productivity boom in the coming years. Part of that function will be AI. We can't pick necessarily what is going to happen. We can't predict the future. But alongside that, I would watch biotechnology and its integration of AI as well. These are going to be huge disruptors and huge growth drivers. Disruption in the technology field always leads to growth. Remember the information technology revolution, that was the 80s and 90s. That was putting a PC and an internet in every household. Massively disruptive, but massively positive for growth. So it does factor in. It doesn't factor in necessarily to the decimal point, but it is going to be a major disruptor and a major growth factor. And the U.S. really still stands at the forefront. And you have our younger generations, not so much Gen X and Boomer, but Millennial and Gen Z, really adaptive to that AI technology. They're going to be the generations that take this to the next level in the broader economy. So we think we're expecting good things from the AI contribution.
Presented, and he did not have one note card. Is he real or is he a robot? Yeah. So that was awesome, Dan. Thank you so much for being with us. And I just want to thank you Thurling for linking us up, and Maria Pires, who's not here, she's our finance director, she couldn't be here today, is who introduced us to you. So I want to thank her in her absence as well. So right now, we're going to have just quick trivia. Does anybody know how many small and large businesses there are in Trumbull? No one? Not the same table of overachievers. Right here, the lady in blue. Very good. 1,850 businesses in Trumbull. And just really quick, how many consumers do we have within 150 miles? Right here. Over 40 million. And they're new and they know Trumbull City. And we're only going to have one more. Why was Jonathan Trumbull famous? Does anyone know?
Revolutionary War.
Partial answer. First governor, last governor of the colony, first governor of the state, right? So Tom, and then there was somebody over there. They shared it. So, all right, we're running. We're gonna hold off on any more trivia because I have a couple of folks I want to just give some quick comments. Dan D'Onofrio, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Bridgeport Regional Business Council. He's probably one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. He is fun, he is everywhere, hands-on, and he's a great partner to me and to our team in Trumbull, and to, I know, Vicki, and to all of our businesses. So come on up, Dan.
Good morning, everyone. I appreciate seeing all of you here this morning and taking the time to celebrate all the good stuff that you folks are doing to make Trumbull a great place to not only live but work. I do want to thank a few people, especially our first selectman here, Vicki Tesoro, and her entire administration. Since the 5 years that I've been here, I've seen this tremendous shift in the engagement of the business community and growth in the business community that we've heard Rena mention earlier. So thank you very much, Vicki Tesoro. I have to acknowledge Rena. You're not going to find a greater champion for business than Rena Bacalar. So the Trumbull Chamber is led currently by Fred Petrosi, our chairman. He works for Webster Bank. He's also a resident of Trumbull. So I want to acknowledge the Trumbull Chamber. We do a lot more than ribbon cuttings and eating a lot during restaurant week, which I did last week. And we're looking forward to later this morning to welcome Transpac. So hopefully many of you will join us for that. But we do a lot more than that, and I can promise you one thing. We have something for everyone, no matter what type of business you are, even if you're a solopreneur, an entrepreneur, or just someone looking for professional development. So I leave you with the magazine at your desk, or at your chair. There's a lot of great content in there. In fact, there's a lot of content about Trumbull and the reinvention of the Trumbull Corporate Park. So take a moment, especially if you're a Trumbull resident and you're curious what's going on there. There's some really good content in there, as well as what's going on around the region. So I, again, thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for your contributions into the business community. If you're not engaged with the Trumbull Chamber of Commerce and or the BRBC, I welcome you to connect with us. In your folder, there's also a little flyer in there on how you can do so. And thank you again for joining us this morning. Have a great day.
Ask, we have one more special guest that's going to come and talk about a very important project to the community, our Veterans and First Responder Center that we've been working on over the years. Ray Baldwin is the chair of the building committee. He's also a former first selectman and a former police officer, lawyer, right? Did I get it all?
You got a lot of jobs.
Okay. That's it. And you can find him at the Windsock with me on a Saturday, sometimes having a beer. Thank you,
Rena. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Before I begin, I'm going to ask everybody who's a veteran to please stand up and be recognized. Anybody who's a veteran? So I'm going to have a trivia question. How many people in the room can tell me how many veterans there are in the greater Trumbull area? No, you don't. In the greater Trumbull area, there's over 30,000 veterans in our community. And the Trumbull Veterans First Responder Center is here, is going to be built to address the concerns that we have for veterans that are returning to the community. Imagine yourself, you're 21 years old, you've just spent nearly 4 years in the military, including a tour of duty in a combat zone. You get discharged, you come home, what do? Where do you go? Where do you seek help? Unfortunately, there's not many services in our state for that. I mean, you go to the VA hospital in West Haven, there's facilities in Stanford, but there's a big gap in between that the town of Trumbull is hoping to fill, and that's the Trumbull Veterans and First Responder Center, which will help with healthcare issues, job training, re-entry into society, getting acclimated to civilian life, which is very foreign to what you're going to experience in the military. I know from personal experience, it can be a very difficult time. Take many, many years to make that adjustment, and that's what we're about here in Trumbull. And I want to thank Rena Bacalar for being a champion of that. And I also want to thank Mary Beth Thornton, who's a member of the committee and who was chairman of the town council. To date, we've raised $2.5 million. We're about $1.2 million short, and I know there's bankers out there, so I'm willing to accept a check at the end of today's meeting. But we had great support in our community, in our delegation. Senator Marilyn Moore, who I think is still here, was the very first one to jump in and commit to this project, and was able to get us $1.5 million in bonding from the state of Connecticut. State Rep Sarah Keat, is she here? Sarah, thank you very much. Sarah just came through the $250,000. And of course, our first selectman, Vicky Tesoro, the town council, the board of finance have all supported this project. And like I said, we're about 1.2 million short. Once we get that, we'll be able to go out to bid for this project, which is very worthwhile and affects probably everybody in this room. Everybody either knows a veteran or has a veteran in their family. And this project, this center, will be a big step to help them out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. I forgot Marine Corps Vietnam veteran, so thank you for your service, Ray, on many levels. And I just want to reiterate the thanks to Senator Moore and the delegation that's here today and not here. Senator Moore, not only did you lead on this issue, but you also, you heard Vicky Tesoro talk about the mall study we're doing, and Senator Moore did help deliver some of the planning dollars, a significant amount of the planning dollars. They're going through that effort too that will help us reinvent not just the mall property, but the whole area from the Merritt Parkway to the Bridgeport line, Main Street to Madison Avenue. And we're already attracting investor interest and so forth for that area as a result of the work we're doing on the study, and we're not even halfway through that process. So thank you, thank the delegation. Ben McGordy is also with us, and Representative Kitt, and those that are not with us. So thank you. I just want to invite our selectmen for just a few closing comments. I can't wait to actually meet the Transpac folks. I do know Zach, I know, but you know, the whole team. We're heading over there. You are all welcome. We're taking a caravan across Trumbull to 120 Corporate Drive. You are welcome to join us and help us welcome this new manufacturer to Trumbull. We're excited. And when Vicki said we're going to help you link with other businesses, we are. And Lindy, is she still here? Where is Lindy? Did she step out? She's from the State Department of Economic and Community Development, and she will be joining us, I believe. But she also is sending someone who contacted me last evening from Nuvo Pasta in Stratford, and they want to talk to you, and they're going to come today. So whether it's a fit or not, we don't know. We're still learning about your business, and you're going to learn about other businesses, but we're here to help you make those connections. And Dan Onofrio is really important to that from the Regional Business Council because he is really heading up some manufacturing coalition work, and he and I are going to be behind you all the way. So, Vicki, come on up. Closing comments.
Thank you, Irina. And Dan had to leave, unfortunately, but let's give him, maybe you can hear it out in the parking lot. Another big round of applause. A spectacular speaker. And as Rita said, we've had some great speakers here, but to be able to do that and not look at a note was pretty incredible. So I just want to say that that was a positive message to hear. You know, we live in extremely challenging times. Wake up every morning with more difficult news to digest. To hear a positive message, I think, helps us all go on with our day. So just another big thank you. Please let him know that. So I just want to say, let's hear it for the baby boomers. I just want a couple other thank yous. Number one is somebody in the audience here that doesn't often listen to me speak. He listens to me ask him to do lots of things. And that would be my husband, Tom. So, hey, Tom. I also want to recognize members of our Planning and Zoning Commission. Planning and zoning is very important to our community, obviously, very important to all the businesses here dealing with development. So I know our chairman, Fred Garrity, is here. Fred, why don't you stand up? Karen Delvecchio was here. She's also on Planning and Zoning. Karen. And I'm not sure I see any other members of Planning and Zoning, but if you're here, wave your hand. Okay. All right. So again, thank you all for joining us this morning. I have to give, of course, another shout out because she wants a raise to Rena. Rena and Gia, back and back here. Thank you so much. And Beryl Kaufman, well, what do you say? When just a marvelous person. Thank you, Beryl, for your chairmanship of the Economic Development. See you all back here next year again. That was real quick. So thank you very much for all you do for the town of Trumbull.